Imani's hands trembled as she stared at the document in front of her. The words blurred together, but one phrase stood out in bold letters at the top: marriage contract. Across the mahogany table sat a man she had never seen before in her life. His tailored suit probably cost more than her entire year's salary. His dark eyes watched her with unsettling patience, like a predator who had already caught his prey. "My name is Seojun Kang," he said calmly. "And you're here because I've decided you're going to be my wife." Imani shot to her feet. "This is insane. I'm calling the police." She reached for her phone, but it wasn't in her pocket. Of course it wasn't. The men who had intercepted her outside the hospital had taken it the moment they mentioned her comatose brother's name. "Sit down, Imani," Seojun said. "Your brother is safe. Better than safe. He's in the finest neurological facility on the East Coast, receiving care your little diner paychecks could never afford. What do you want from me?" "I told you. I want a wife." He slid the contract toward her. "Sign this, and your brother receives the best medical care for as long as he needs. Refuse, and he goes back to that understaffed hospital where he was slowly dying." "You're insane," she whispered. Seojun stood slowly, walking toward her with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. When he reached her, he lifted her chin with one finger, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Perhaps," he said. "But insane men get what they want. And I want you." Imani jerked away from his touch. "Why me? I'm nobody. I have nothing." "Your father was David Carter, wasn't he?" Imani froze. No one talked about her father. He'd abandoned her and her brother Marcus when she was 7 years old, disappeared into the criminal underworld and never looked back. "Your father stole something from my family 15 years ago," Seojun continued. "I've spent years searching for him. The only way to draw him out is to make him care about something. Or someone." The realization hit her like a punch to the chest. "You want to use me as bait. I want to marry you. The wedding will be public. High profile. Your father will see his daughter marrying into the Kang family, and he'll have no choice but to surface. And if he doesn't come?" He walked away from his children without looking back. "He won't come for me. Then you'll remain my wife until he does. I need time to think. You have until midnight. 4 hours." He moved toward the door. "Most people in your position don't get a choice at all. Now, before we go any further, if you're watching this and you're already hooked, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and comment below with the time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far this community reaches. Now let's get back to this story because it's about to get even more intense." The next 4 hours were the longest of Imani's life. They moved her to a lavish room in what she assumed was Seojun's estate. The bed was enormous, covered in silk sheets that probably cost more than her entire apartment. A closet full of designer clothes in her exact size lined one wall. Fresh flowers sat on every surface. It was a gilded cage, and she was the bird. She tried the windows. Locked. The door. Guarded. Her phone had been taken the moment she'd been intercepted outside the hospital. She had no way to contact anyone, no way to know if Marcus was still safe. At 11:30, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," Imani said flatly, not bothering to get up from where she sat on the edge of the bed. The door opened, but it wasn't Seojun who entered. It was an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that seemed completely out of place in this nightmare. "I'm Mrs. Park," the woman said gently. "I've served the Kang family for 30 years. "Congratulations," Imani replied. "Is this the part where you tell me he's not so bad once you get to know him?" Mrs. Park smiled sadly. "No, child. I'm here to tell you that whatever you decide, you should know the full truth." She glanced toward the door nervously before continuing in a lower voice. "Seojun's mother was murdered when he was 12 years old. His father blamed your father for her death. Imani's stomach dropped. What? The item your father stole wasn't just valuable. It was leverage. Evidence that could have brought down an entire criminal empire. When David Carter disappeared with it, he left the Kong family exposed. Their enemies moved in. Seo Jun's mother was killed in the crossfire. I didn't, Imani's voice cracked. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You were just a child yourself. Mrs. Park reached out and took Imani's hands in her own. But Seo Jun has carried that pain for 15 years. He's not a good man, Imani. But he's not entirely evil either. He's just broken. That doesn't give him the right to destroy my life. No. It doesn't. Mrs. Park released her hands and stepped back. But sometimes broken people do terrible things because they don't know any other way. I've watched that boy become a monster, and I've prayed every day that something would change him. She paused at the door. Maybe that something is you. Before Imani could respond, Mrs. Park was gone. At exactly midnight, Seo Jun returned. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Have you made your decision? Imani rose to her feet, her chin lifted despite the trembling in her limbs. Before I answer, I have conditions. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. You're in no position to make demands. And yet I'm making them anyway. She took a step toward him, refusing to be intimidated. If I agree to this, my brother receives the best care money can buy. Not as leverage, but as a guarantee. You put it in writing. Legal documents that protect him even if something happens to me. Seo Jun studied her for a long moment. What else? I want to continue my nursing education. I want my own income that you can't touch. And I want your word that no matter what happens with my father, you will not harm me. You have my word. Your word means nothing to me. I want it in a legally binding contract. For the first time, genuine surprise crossed Seo Jun's features. You've thought this through. I've had 4 hours. I used them wisely. Imani squared her shoulders. So. Do we have a deal? Seo Jun was silent for so long that Imani thought he might refuse. Then, slowly, a smile curved his lips. Not the cold, predatory smile from before. Something different. Almost, impressed. We have a deal, he said. The wedding will take place in 1 week. Okay, I need to pause the story right here because things are about to shift in a major way. Before we continue, I want to know what you're thinking. Do you trust Seo Jun? Do you think Imani is making the right choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. The week leading up to the wedding was a whirlwind of fittings, meetings, and uncomfortable dinners where Imani sat across from her soon-to-be husband and pretended she didn't want to throw her wine in his face. True to his word, Seo Jun had the contracts drawn up within 24 hours. Imani had a lawyer review them, one Seo Jun provided, but she had thoroughly vetted through her own research. Everything was airtight. Marcus's care was guaranteed. Her education would continue. She had her own bank account with a stipend that made her head spin. But none of that changed the fundamental truth of her situation. She was marrying a man who saw her as a means to an end. A tool for revenge. On the night before the wedding, Imani stood on the balcony of her gilded prison, staring out at the city lights below. She heard the door open behind her but didn't turn around. Can't sleep. Seo Jun's voice was softer than usual. Almost human. Would you be able to sleep? She replied without looking at him. He came to stand beside her at the railing, leaving a careful distance between them. No. I suppose not. They stood in silence for a long moment, the cool night air wrapping around them like a shroud. Mrs. Park told me about your mother, Imani finally said. Seo Jun's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. She shouldn't have. Maybe not. But she did. Imani finally turned to look at him, really look at him. In the moonlight, stripped of his cold exterior, he looked younger. More vulnerable. Almost like a regular person instead of a monster. I'm sorry for what happened to her. No child should have to go through that. I don't want your pity. Good. Because I'm not offering it. She turned back to the skyline. I'm just trying to understand the man I'm about to marry. There's nothing to understand. I'm exactly what I appear to be. No one is exactly what they appear to be. She glanced at him sideways. Not even you. Something shifted in his expression. That crack in his armor appeared again, just for a moment. But before Imani could examine it more closely, it was gone. Get some rest, he said brusquely. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He left without another word, and Imani was alone again with her thoughts. The wedding was everything Seo Jun had promised. High profile. Extravagant. Covered by every major news outlet in the country. Imani wore a custom gown that cost more than she would have made in 10 years of waitressing. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style that made her feel like a stranger in her own body. The church was packed with people she didn't know. Business associates. Politicians. Celebrities. All watching as she walked down the aisle toward a man who held her future in his hands. When she reached the altar, Seo Jun took her hands in his. His grip was firm but surprisingly gentle. You look beautiful, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. You look like a man who always gets what he wants, she replied. That almost smile appeared again. I do. The ceremony was a blur. Vows she didn't mean. Rings that felt like shackles. And then, finally, the words that sealed her fate. You may now kiss the bride. Seo Jun leaned in, and for a terrifying moment, Imani thought he would actually kiss her. But instead, his lips brushed against her ear. Well played, Mrs. Kong, he whispered. But the game is only beginning. Then he pressed the briefest, most impersonal kiss to the corner of her mouth and pulled away. The reception was exhausting. Imani smiled until her face hurt, accepted congratulations from strangers who had no idea she was a prisoner at her own wedding, and counted the minutes until she could escape. But escape was the one thing she wasn't allowed to do. 3 hours into the reception, one of Seo Jun's men approached him with an urgent whisper. Imani watched as her husband's expression transformed from controlled businessman to something far more dangerous. Stay here, he ordered her. What's happening? I said stay here. He was gone before she could argue, disappearing through a side door with several of his men in tow. Imani lasted approximately 30 seconds before she followed. She crept through the corridors of the reception venue, following the sound of raised voices until she reached a closed door. Through the crack, she could see Seo Jun standing with his back to her, facing a man she didn't recognize. But something about the stranger's voice made her blood run cold. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about this little wedding? The man said. Did you really think you could use my daughter without consequences? Imani's heart stopped. She would recognize that voice anywhere, even after 17 years. It was older now, raspier, but unmistakably his. Her father had come. The door was suddenly yanked open, and Imani stumbled forward into the room. Seo Jun caught her arm, steadying her, but his eyes never left the man across from him. Imani. Her father's face crumpled with something that might have been emotion. Look how you've grown. Don't. Her voice came out harder than she expected. Don't you dare stand there and act like you know me. You left us. You left Marcus and me with nothing, and you never looked back. I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself. Tears she'd been holding back for 17 years finally broke free. Do you have any idea what we went through? Mom died working 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. Marcus got mixed up with the wrong people because he was looking for a father figure and you weren't there. And I spent my entire life wondering what was so wrong with us that you couldn't stay. David Carter looked at his daughter, and for the first time, genuine pain crossed his weathered features. There's so much you don't understand. Then explain it to me. Imani stepped toward him, ignoring Seo Jun's warning grip on her arm. Explain why you abandoned your children. Explain why you stole something that got this man's mother killed. Explain why you're here now, after all these years. Because I love you, David said simply. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't be there. Everything I did was to keep you safe. The people I was involved with, they would have used you and Marcus to get to me. I had to disappear. I had to make it look like I didn't care. Well, congratulations, Imani said bitterly. You're an excellent actor. David flinched as if she'd struck him. Then he turned to Seo Jun, and his expression hardened. Let her go. I'll give you what you want, but only if you release my daughter from this farce of a marriage. Seo Jun finally spoke, his voice cold as ice. You're not in a position to negotiate. I have the evidence that can bring down the Yoon syndicate. The same evidence your father has been hunting for 15 years. You want it? Fine. But Imani goes free first. The marriage stands. Then we have nothing to discuss. David turned toward the door, and something inside Imani cracked. Despite everything, despite all the years of abandonment and pain, this man was still her father. And he was about to walk out of her life again. Wait, she heard herself say. Both men turned to look at her. I want the truth, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. All of it. Why did you take that evidence? What really happened to Seo Jun's mother? And what is so important about this Yoon syndicate that people are willing to kill and die over it? David and Seo Jun exchanged a look that Imani couldn't read. Something passed between them, some understanding that excluded her entirely. Tell her, Seo Jun said finally. She deserves to know. David exhaled heavily and ran a hand over his face. For the first time, Imani noticed how old he looked. How tired. The Yoon syndicate controls half the illegal operations on the East Coast, he began. Drugs. Weapons. Human trafficking. 15 years ago, I was their accountant. I saw things no one should ever see. Children being sold. Families destroyed. I couldn't live with myself anymore, so I started gathering evidence. But you got caught, Seo Jun interjected. And when you ran, you took more than just the evidence. You took something that belonged to my father. David nodded slowly. A ledger. Names and payments of every politician, judge, and law enforcement official in Yoon's pocket. Your father had been using it as insurance, keeping Yoon from moving against the Kong family. When I took it, Yoon declared war, Seo Jun finished. And my mother was the first casualty. The room fell silent. Imani looked between the two men, her father and her husband, and finally began to understand the web of violence and betrayal she'd been caught in. So what happens now? She asked quietly. Now, David said, we make a choice. I can give you both what you want. The evidence goes to Seo Jun. He uses it to destroy Yoon and avenge his mother. And in return, he releases you from this marriage and lets us both disappear. No. Everyone turned to look at Imani in surprise. No. Seo Jun repeated. I said no. She straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. I don't want to disappear. I have a brother who needs me. I have a life I'm building. And I will not let any man, not my father, not my husband, decide my fate for me. She turned to David. If you have evidence that can take down people who traffic children, then you don't get to use it as a bargaining chip for my freedom. You give it to the authorities. You do the right thing for once in your miserable life. Then she turned to Seo Jun and you. If you want to avenge your mother, fine. I understand that. But you don't get to keep me prisoner while you do it. You want this marriage to mean something? Then treat me like a partner, not a pawn. The silence that followed was deafening. Seo Jun stared at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Something like wonder. Something like respect. You're not what I expected, he said finally. I'm not what anyone expects, she replied. That's what happens when you spend your whole life fighting just to survive. You become stronger than anyone realizes. For the first time since she'd met him, Seo Jun smiled. A real smile, without cruelty or calculation. It transformed his face entirely, and Imani felt her heart stutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Then we do this together, he said. As partners. Partners, she agreed. They didn't become allies overnight. Trust had to be earned, on both sides. But something shifted in that moment. The power dynamic that had defined their relationship began to rebalance. Over the following weeks, Imani found herself drawn deeper into Seo Jun's world. She learned about his business, his allies, his enemies. She met the men who worked for him and was surprised to find that many of them treated him with genuine loyalty, not just fear. And slowly, reluctantly, she began to see the man behind the monster. He brought her coffee without being asked, prepared exactly how she liked it. He hired tutors so she could continue her nursing education without falling behind. He sat by her brother's bedside for hours when she was too exhausted to stay awake, just so Marcus wouldn't be alone. He never touched her without permission. Never demanded anything she wasn't willing to give. The marriage remained a business arrangement, but the business had started to feel personal. 3 months after the wedding, Marcus woke up. Imani was in class when she got the call. She ran through the hospital corridors, her heart pounding, and burst through the door to find her brother sitting up in bed, looking confused but alive. Imani? His voice was rough from months of disuse. What's going on? Where am I? She couldn't speak. She just threw her arms around him and sobbed into his shoulder, all the fear and grief and hope of the past months pouring out of her in an uncontrollable flood. When she finally pulled back, she noticed Seo Jun standing in the doorway. Watching her with something in his eyes that she couldn't name. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned and walked away, giving her privacy to reunite with her brother. That night, Imani found him on the balcony of their shared home. She walked up beside him, closer than she would have stood 3 months ago. Why do you always come out here? She asked. It reminds me that the world is bigger than my problems. He glanced at her. How's your brother? Weak. Confused. But alive. She paused. Because of you. I didn't do it for gratitude. I know. But you have it anyway. They stood in silence, watching the city lights flicker below. Seo Jun, she said softly, and it was the first time she'd used his name without sarcasm or anger. What happens after you get what you want? After Yoon is destroyed and your mother is avenged. What happens to us? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted finally. I've spent so long focused on revenge that I never thought about what comes after. Maybe it's time to start thinking about it. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his eyes were soft in a way she'd never seen. What do you want, Imani? If you could have anything, what would it be? She considered the question carefully. I want to finish school. I want Marcus to be healthy. I want to help people who feel as hopeless as I did 3 months ago. She met his gaze. And I want to see if this, whatever this is between us, can be something real. You hated me. I still might. Some days. A smile tugged at her lips. But I'm starting to think hatred isn't the only thing I feel. Seo Jun reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle in a way that made her breath catch. I've never wanted anything for myself, he said quietly. Not since my mother died. But you make me want things. A future. Peace. Maybe even happiness. That sounds terrifying. It is. But he was smiling as he said it. Will you help me figure it out? Partners, she reminded him. Partners, he agreed. And when he leaned in this time, it wasn't a business transaction. It wasn't a performance for cameras or guests. It was just the two of them, broken and healing, finding something unexpected in the most impossible circumstances. His lips met hers, and Imani Carter, the girl who had spent her whole life fighting alone, finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to anymore. Now, before I finish this story, I need to tell you something. If you've made it this far, it means you're exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. We post stories like this every single week, stories about strong women who fight for their futures, complicated love, and twists you never see coming. So if you haven't already, click that subscribe button right now, turn on the notification bell, and I promise you won't regret it. The takedown of the Yoon syndicate took 6 months of careful planning. Imani's father finally did the right thing, turning over all his evidence to federal prosecutors. The arrests made headlines across the country. Politicians, judges, law enforcement officials, all of them exposed for the monsters they were. And Seo Joon stood at the center of it all, finally seeing justice for his mother after 15 years. But the victory came with a cost. Yoon's people didn't go down without a fight. There were threats. Attacks. Imani and Marcus had to be placed under constant security for their own protection. Through it all, Seo Joon never left her side. The day the last of Yoon's lieutenants was sentenced, Seo Joon came home to find Imani waiting for him in the living room. She was holding a piece of paper. "What's that?" he asked. "Divorce papers." She held them up. "Our original agreement said the marriage would last until your mother's death was avenged. That was 6 months ago. By all rights, you should have let me go by now." Seo Joon's expression flickered with something that looked like fear. "Is that what you want?" Imani walked toward him slowly, the papers still in her hand. "I want you to tell me the truth. Why haven't you brought this up? Why have you let months pass without mentioning our agreement?" He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "Because I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of losing you." He reached out and took her hands in his, papers and all. "I know how we started. I know I gave you every reason to hate me. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being a business arrangement. You became my partner. My friend. The person I want to see first thing in the morning and last thing at night." Tears welled in Imani's eyes. "Seo Joon. I love you, Imani." The words came out rough, almost desperate. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was the night you stood up to your father. Maybe it was the way you held my hand after Yoon's men attacked the hospital. Maybe it was 1,000 small moments that I didn't even notice at the time. But I love you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." A tear slipped down Imani's cheek. Then another. "Say something," he pleaded. "Even if it's goodbye. Just say something." Imani lifted the divorce papers between them. Then, slowly and deliberately, she tore them in half. "I don't want a divorce," she said softly. "I want a real marriage. One that starts with both of us choosing each other, not because we have to, but because we want to." Seo Joon's breath caught. "You mean? I love you too." She smiled through her tears. "God help me, but I love you too." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him and held on just as tight. "Does this mean I get to plan a real wedding?" Mrs. Park's voice came from the doorway, and they both looked up to see her wiping tears from her eyes. Imani laughed. "I think it does." 6 months later, they stood in a garden surrounded by the people who actually mattered. Marcus, fully recovered and serving as man of honor. Her nursing school friends. Seo Jun's most trusted men, who had become something like family. And this time, when Imani walked down the aisle, she wasn't walking toward a captor or a business partner. She was walking toward the man she loved, the man who had shown her that even monsters could change. The vows they spoke were real. The kiss they shared was passionate. And when the officiant introduced them as husband and wife for the second time, it wasn't the beginning of a prison sentence. It was the beginning of forever. Later that night, as they danced at their reception, Seo Jun leaned down and whispered in her ear. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing past the monster. For teaching me that I could be something better." Imani reached up and touched his face gently. "You were never a monster, Seo Jun. You were just a broken boy who grew up without enough love. But you have it now." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I have everything now." And as they swayed together under the stars, Imani Carter Kong realized that sometimes the most unexpected paths led to the most beautiful destinations. She had started this journey as a victim, forced into vows she never wanted. But she had ended it as a victor, choosing a love that she never expected. Life had taught her that struggle didn't equal weakness. That fighting for yourself wasn't selfishness, it was survival. And that even in the darkest moments, when everything seemed impossible, hope could still bloom. She had married a billionaire mafia boss. She had confronted the father who abandoned her. She had helped take down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. And she had found love in the most unexpected place imaginable. Not bad for a girl from Brooklyn who used to wait tables for tips. Not bad at all.